Good morning, all. Welcome. We're a little late because we had such a nice opening and keynote speaker. So I'm gonna keep this very short. My name is Martina. I'm the moderator for today, but it's all about Lloyd, who's gonna actually do the talk. So I'm gonna give the word to him at the end. We might have a bit of time for questions and then I'll get back to you. Lloyd, over to you.
All right. You've hopefully seen me on chat.fire.org. If not, please get over there. It's the best place to engage in the fire community when you're not here. If you're here, obviously, this is the best place to get engaged in the community. I've been involved in fire since before it was fire, and I'm here to talk to you about reference implementations. So I've been involved in a whole lot of different implementation guides, but the one that I've been most excited about is a small implementation guide in the physical activity space. It was started by the American Heart Association and a whole bunch of other folks who came to the recognition that physical activity makes a huge difference in all sorts of different healthcare outcomes, and we're not doing nearly enough to track it and engage patients and encourage them to be physically active. In many cases, it's more effective than a lot of medications and other medical interventions. And so the question for them was, how do we get people to start sharing that data? And somebody pointed them at HL7 and said, you should go do an implementation guide. And they said, what's that? So I've been helping them through the process of forming a community, getting an implementation guide through the HL7 ballot process, and now the hard part of trying to ramp that up in the implementation space. So physical activity is now part of US CDI, not the part that's regulated to come into play real soon, but it will get there eventually. But we still don't have tons of support both within the EHR space, but also in the broader community. One of the things that this project wanted to do is enable physical activity supporters like gyms and personal trainers and physiotherapists, et cetera, to be able to share information with patients, and patients share information with them, and all of those folks share information with clinicians and make that happen. We identified reference implementations as a really important thing in the fire area from day one. We had connectathons really early, and we had reference implementations in Java and .NET of the core fire standard, and we've tried to have reference implementations, not necessarily with all, but certainly the vast majority of implementation guides that we put out. RIs do a number of things. First of all, they tell us whether our wonderful documentation written on paper can actually be turned into code, because we've learned on occasion that no, that actually doesn't turn into code terribly well. It gives people who are doing early development an opportunity to test, because when you are the first person to show up to the dance, you don't necessarily have somebody to dance with, and a reference implementation gives you perhaps not a very pretty dance partner, but still nice to be able to dance. It also means that developers actually look at the implementation guide. It's not being looked at only by people who are writing it, it's being looked at by people who actually need to understand it and turn it into code, and is it explained in a clear enough way that you can turn it into code. Sometimes people have trouble understanding what an implementation guide is really intended to do. And if you can bring up on a screen and say, see, here's the data flow, here's what that actually looks like in reality, people go, oh, that's what that's for. And that can be really helpful in turning an idea sort of on paper or on the web into something that is meaningful for people, that they go, okay, yeah, I can put money behind that. That makes sense to me. And then ideally, it also helps the development community by giving them code that they can leverage and reuse. So rather than everybody having to build everything, if you have a well-done reference implementation that handles some of the hard parts, you can actually steal that code and go and use that to accelerate adoption. We decided to take things a little bit further with the physical activity project and take our reference implementation and actually move it into production. Not because we really want to have stuff in production, because maintaining stuff in production is hard, but the reality is personal trainers don't really have a heck of a lot. Lots of gyms don't necessarily have a heck of a lot. And EHRs are really distracted by regulation, which is understandable because while there is certainly return on investment long-term in terms of physical activity in healthcare, it's much easier to make a business case of if we don't do these 10 things, we're going to start getting penalized by Medicare and Medicaid and everybody else, and we don't want that. And so we needed something that we could get out there sooner and start priming that market. We also wanted to get feedback from real users in terms of, is this implementation guide actually meeting their needs? Do we have the content in the specification that real clinicians, real personal trainers, real patients actually want? And ideally, we will start benefiting patients sooner. And of course, all of these earlier things, if you've got something that is in production, you've got a better proof of concept, you've got a better testing partner, you've got better visualization of what this thing means, and you really have reusable content because you've got something that actually functions in production. When we undertook this, which sounded like a really awesome idea when we first came up with it, we didn't quite realize everything that we were in for. But there's a lot of stuff that you can sort of hand wave or ignore a little bit of when you are creating a reference implementation that is just for testers. You don't need to make user registration super easy because you can just have a single user or 5 or 6 canned users and say, this is your patient, use that one. In a real system, you can't use the same patient resource for everybody. And so we actually have to build that infrastructure to make it work. UIs on reference implementations tend to be almost functional, but they tend not to be super pretty. They don't have to be. But if you're going to put something in front of a real clinician, in front of a real patient, it needs to not suck. It doesn't have to be the most gorgeous thing in the world if it's functional and useful, but they need to have confidence that the thing that they are using is actually robust. And if it looks like a piece of something off the floor, then they're not going to trust it. And also, you really have to think about user workflow. I mean, when you're building an RI for testing purposes, then it's just developers that suffer through it, and we don't really care about developers here. But obviously, patients and clinicians who have day jobs, they need to do things efficiently, and so you really have to think about the user interface. Security becomes no longer something that you're just trying to test. It becomes something that has to be real. And so you think about it much more deeply. Often reference implementations come without any expectation for security at all because security gets in the way of testing the underlying functionality and you just want to get it up and running as fast as you can. And we have a mode like that in our reference implementations, but we have to make sure that that is absolutely not turned on in real production because we do want to protect patient data. I mean, how many steps did you do today or how far did you run is probably not the most sensitive part of your electronic health record, but it's still patient data. Reference implementations tend not to have much in the way of documentation, if any. Obviously, if you're going to put something into production and have real patients and real providers use it, you need some of that, and it needs to be decent. And people who are good at writing code are not necessarily good at writing documentation. And the biggest challenge is where do you draw the boundaries? You have an implementation guide. It has a specific set of functionality, which is great. Obviously, you want that in your reference implementation. But what else do your users ask for? And users always ask for more stuff. What else can you reasonably include, or should you reasonably include, before you're turning your product into a full-blown EHR rather than just a reference implementation for this particular task? And sort of setting those boundaries and trying to enforce them can be a bit of a challenge. So we have built and expect to take into limited production sometime later this month a patient application. Runs on iOS and Android, as well as on the web, and a provider app that runs on those same set of platforms, as well as a server based on Happy that supports pretty much all of the functionality in the physical activity implementation guide, which means the ability to capture observations from patients, so how many steps, how many minutes, what was your peak heart rate, what's your average heart rate, how much did you like what you did? Was that run awesome or did it really suck? The ability to capture goals, orders for physical activity, the ability to manage referrals, assign tasks to patients that said, hey, we'd like you to look at this documentation or watch this video or fill out this short survey. And then on the provider side, being able to share conditions, reports, and then some underlying maintenance stuff of being able to manage patients and providers. And so all of that exists and has been tested, and we're going to start getting real human feedback from patients who are trying to manage their physical activity soon, which is both super exciting and kind of terrifying. Was going to give a demo, but on this particular network, my phone and my computer do not want to talk to each other. So we're going to do screenshots instead. So these are the home screens of the patient app on the left and the provider app on the right. In both cases, we have the ability to see conditions and goals and referrals and stuff like that. We have the ability to sync with the FHIR server. In fact, we have the ability to sync with multiple servers so that if a patient actually has a cardiologist and a physiotherapist and a personal trainer and a GP who are all connected, they can share information with all of them. They can track their information and look at it over the course of days or weeks. They can graph it, they can include goals in their graphs, and all sorts of wonderful things. Trying to get you back on time, but if you are interested in more about what we have done or are interested in seeing and playing with the apps or the server or the implementation guide, reach out. I'd be happy to chat about what we've done. And I think I've got 2 minutes for questions.
And we can steal a little from the next session and then from the break. So
All right.
I don't want to take it all on you and shorten your session. So please, if there's people who have questions.
It seems quite common sense that a reference implementation is a must whenever you put together a specification. How often is it done? I'm not talking about a production-ready one, but a simple reference implementation that proves that the specification as designed by the authors actually works.
I don't have a broad set of statistics. Within the HL7 International publication process, there is a requirement to have done connectathon testing before we allow you to go to ballot. That can be waived in a few exceptional circumstances. We've had a couple of IGs come to us and say, this is a tightly regulated space. Nobody does diddly squat until such time as there's a regulation and we have to publish before we can regulate. But in the vast majority of circumstances, you can't actually bring content to the ballot community without having tested. Now, you can test without having a reference implementation. You can just have a whole bunch of people come with production-ready apps, which is fine, but you do have to turn something into code. But that's a requirement within HL7. It is not a requirement within the broader community. There is a community framework that we're trying to bring more organizations into, and it has implementation, not so much expectations, but encouragement. So it's not quite as tight as HL7 International is, but certainly recognition within the community that building stuff before you declare it even partially baked is important.
I had one more question over here, and then there's probably time for one more. So if you want to be the final one, think of that. Let me see how I get there. Can you
Just throw it.
My question will be quick. Sorry, maybe I missed it, maybe you'll mention.
Yep.
What's the version you're based on, like R4, R4B, or 6?
This implementation guide is based on R4. I have an intention over the course of the summer to update the implementation guide to be compatible with both R4. Well, actually, that's not true. It's compliant right now with US CDI 1, so US Core 311. It will soon be compatible with 610 as well. It will still be an R4-based IG, because in the US, which is where this organization is focused, they are going to be on R4 for quite some time. The reality is most of the data elements that are relevant, though, have not changed between R4 and R5, or for that matter, from R5 to R6. So you could pretty easily port it if you wanted to use it elsewhere on a different version.
The last one? You've got it.
What about performances? Because when you talk about production-ready reference implementations, I think about performances, and sometimes, especially on the server side, can be a bit challenging when you get more data inside to be performant.
Absolutely. And we are seeing some of that already in our testing. I mean, it's cloud-based, so we do have the ability to scale. And we are built on top of a server that has a fair bit of production and scaling experience. So I would certainly not recommend implementing something brand new and trying to take it into production unless you're client only. But yeah, we've had to do a number of things just in terms of syncing to make that happen more in the background, and rather than let's just grab your entire life history, as the life history starts to get larger, let's grab the last month, and then as you look at past months, we'll go grab more, because apparently you're interested and many people aren't. And so yes, we've definitely had to consider things like that. Good point. All right, thank you all.